Welcome to Orchestrating Outcomes, a new video series brought to you by TraceLink that explores the challenges and opportunities of supply chain digitalization, featuring insights from industry leaders across the pharmaceutical supply chain. My name is Henry Ames, and I'm responsible for the logistics orchestration here at TraceLink, and I'm very excited today to have Tsu Rasolonjatovo, former Director of Global Logistics Transformation for Elanco, which was formerly the Animal Health Division of Eli Lilly, I believe prior to 2019. Maybe, Tsu, you could help clarify my timing on that. But Tsu, first, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us as part of this Orchestrating Outcomes series. Very excited for today's conversation. We've known each other for quite a few years, and you've always been incredibly generous with your time at various conferences, sharing your invaluable knowledge and experiences across the industry. So could you start by just elaborating on some of your varied experiences? Walk us through the evolution of your career.
Sure, Henry, and good afternoon, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. And like you said, we've known each other for many years indeed. But I think it's the first time I hear you pronouncing my full name, so well done with that. But you may keep calling me Tsu, right? So in short, I'm an international supply chain executive, right? So international because I was born in Madagascar, my wife is Italian, our children were born in Belgium, I'm multilingual, and I lived in 6 different countries so far. So you could say I'm almost as international as the job I do. And that job, of course, is supply chain. So like you said, I spent the last 2 decades in supply chain, logistics, and procurement. It all started, with a master's degree in that field. Then my first 5 years were my formative years. So I had the chance to work for a leading company in the automotive industry, the food industry, the consulting industry. And 15 years ago, I fell for the healthcare and the pharmaceutical sector. So I must say at this point, both of my parents are medical doctors. So I kind of grew up with an early passion to bring health to people. So it really felt natural to work for companies like GSK and Elanco. So you asked a bit of my background. So for GSK, I actually led global procurement categories in clinical, warehousing, transportation, and cold chain for 5 years. And for Elanco, it was a 10-year journey, which started in the regional logistics in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Then I headed regional logistics in Asia Pacific. And then my latest role was indeed global head of logistics transformation. So when I look back, I've spent most of my years driving business transformation, mostly by optimizing processes and systems, and then empowering people along the supply chain.
That's so interesting. I had forgotten that your parents were both medical doctors. So the whole concept of patient safety and product quality is deeply rooted in your DNA.
Oh, absolutely. And even when I was little, I followed vaccines campaigns with my parents. So it was really ingraining to be in that sector from the start.
That's so interesting. So you've seen so many changes over the years. Could you maybe share with us a little bit about sort of what are your thoughts on the future of healthcare logistics? Where do you think this industry is headed?
Yeah, I think we're facing fundamental challenges and opportunities. I'll probably take 4 of them. The first one is about people. The second one is planet. The third one, I think, is technology. And I will take geopolitics as the fourth one, right? So let's start with the people first, as always. So healthcare logistics is, for me, and is and will be made for people, right? As we discussed, I'm from Madagascar. Disease knows no border. And our job is to deliver health. It's not parcels, it's not pallets, it's health, really. So therefore, it's all about quality, affordability, and service level, and bringing the right medicine to the right patient, at the right timing, at the right place, in an affordable way, will remain our fundamental mission. And if you think about it, there's still a lot of room for progress, right? If you take healthcare logistics on the African continent, while there is 16% of the world population living in Africa, the continent only hosts less than 2% of clinical trials today. The other challenge I'd like to bring on is the planet, right? It's all over the news, but especially now we have the COP we just finalized, right? So Healthcare logistics will definitely make a difference to the environment. Why? Well, according to Climate Watch, the second largest source of greenhouse gas emission is transportation. It comes right after electricity and heat, actually. And according to the World Economic Forum, you have 70% of pharma manufacturers' emission coming from scope 3 emission, which basically is generated by warehousing and transportation activities. So even if we need more convincing, right, the regulators are there. They're adding more and more regulations. They're enforcing companies to measure, control, reduce emissions for healthcare logistics. So I really think that the planet is going to be another, important challenge in the future. Let me tackle geopolitics as the third one. So if you look at healthcare logistics, we are heavily regulated, and our trade and compliance environment depends heavily on the moving geopolitical situation. So again, it's in the news, navigating through tariff wars, embargoes, trade restrictions, sealed airspace. It's all part of the day-to-day of a logistics team. And the ability to anticipate those risks, to build anti-fragile supply chain is really crucial to maintain healthcare services. And I think we can do that, anti-fragile supply chain, by tackling the fourth fundamental, which is basically technology. In my view, technology is the X factor for positive change in healthcare logistics. Why? For example, if you take technology increases, we have increases in our ability to gather real-time data, to have more integrated system, and to rely on AI-supported processes and decision. So with the help of digitalization of healthcare logistics, I really believe that the future is truly now. How does that sound?
That's perfect. I mean, you've covered so many different topics. Interesting, the people, the planet, the political situation, and of course, technology. And as you were talking, I was thinking about, really sort of what transpired or what has transpired since COVID. You think about the geopolitical environment and the complexity of the pharmaceutical supply chain and the awareness that was generated from the drugs and APIs coming from various countries like India and China, and then calls for nearshoring, friendshoring, reshoring, sort of bringing the drug manufacturing process in a much more consolidated manner. There's so many elements of this that get so complicated. When you're thinking about digitalization, and we've talked a little bit about this in preparation for today, what are your thoughts about sort of the future for digitalization as it pertains to the pharmaceutical supply chain? Where do you think companies are investing for the future?
Yeah, and because technology is such a trendy topic and such a differentiator, is going to be adding, like I said, the X factor to the industry. We see investment all over the place. But if I have to select a few parts of investment, I would say digital twin platforms is one thing. So, those platforms where you can receive unstructured data in almost real time. It's coming from various sources under different formats, and then the platform agnostically structures this data in one integrated data lake, and it gives access to one version of the truth. I think that's one investment we see coming. I probably would like to bring forward the strategic network design softwares as well. So it's well known that 80% of the logistics value is trapped in the supply chain strategic upstream decisions. When you ask questions about where do I put my warehouses, where do I put my manufacturing sites, what is my safety stock policy, etc. I think network design is going to unlock this value going forward. Risk, when we talk geopolitics, I think risk management platforms is going to be really important as well in terms of investment. So those platforms that are able to gather any type of risks, to name a few: supplier bankruptcy, political unrests, port strikes, natural diseases, road incidents, you name it. And you take these risks, you overlay the information with a digital map of your assets, people, trucks, ships, airplanes, warehouses, whatever. that in real time, and it gives you actually a very clear picture of where your supply chain may face risk going forward. Maybe one more addition is the planning systems, very trendy also recently. Integrated systems that connects sales planning, manufacturing planning, supply chain planning, logistics planning, and all this in one seamless process to drive holistic decisions from one end to the other end of the supply chain. And there are many other, I mean, I skipped on purpose, I think warehouse automation, AI, machine learning, IoT, but I think ultimately what is going to drive this investment is being able to seamlessly collect data and then to impactfully leverage the data for decision making.
It's so interesting. There's so many elements that you brought up there. I mean, thinking about the strategic network design and the ability to gain access to information sort of outside the four walls of your supply chain, and the investments in new technologies that are driving that digital connectivity. I imagine that's a real area of growth for the broader industry. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And there've been so many investments in risk management platforms, and you mentioned, port strikes and things like that, but weather also comes to mind, looking at weather patterns and being able to sort of anticipate or make predictive calls on the movement of goods.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And what we used to call, black swan events happen more regularly. So I don't know if we need to change and find another name for that.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got 2 decades of experience in logistics, supply chain, procurement, strategic sourcing, contract manufacturing. You mentioned clinical. I'd forgotten about that. I'd forgotten you'd spent some time in the clinical operations. So it's really sort of end-to-end pharmaceutical supply chain. You've also had some exposure to different verticals. You mentioned automotive, fast-moving consumer goods, and of course, pharma. Could you maybe share with us sort of your thoughts on how would you compare, how would you contrast the different elements of maturity, digital maturity, as it pertains to these different supply chains? I know that's a tricky question. I'm putting you on the spot, but
that's all right. It's just I'm thinking I'm going to make enemies answering this, right? Why? Because digital maturity is a rather new concept in the sense that it became trendy at the beginning of the years 2000. Before that, we talked only about communication and collaboration. The word digital was not really present. So what I want to say is connectivity has always been crucial and well embedded in the supply chain processes. It's a fact for both the automotive or the FMCG or the pharma industry. Now, to get to the tricky part of the answer to your question, right? I'd like to use what Gartner does, right? I'm an avid reader of Gartner's publication. And by the way, I'm also a big fan of their supply chain maturity model. I use that quite a bit during my career, and I found it very, very useful. But anyway, since 24, I think, 24, Gartner has been publishing a top supply chain ranking. And that ranking includes a score on digital maturity. I'd like to ask you a question. I don't know if you know when a pharmaceutical company first entered the Gartner's top 20.
I should know the answer to that, but I don't. We are big fans of Gartner here at TraceLink as well. So I read many of those documents, but I don't recall when the first pharma company entered the Gartner top 20.
Don't worry. If I had bet on this, I think I would have lost as well, because it took 13 years since 2004. The first time pharma company entered the ranking was in 2017, and that was Johnson & Johnson. So today, fast forward 2024, J&J is in the top 5, and there are 2 other pharma companies in the top 20, which is Pfizer and AstraZeneca. So I hope that helps giving some comparison with the rest of the verticals.
It's truly surprising, but it doesn't surprise me that it's J&J, Pfizer, and AZ. I've known a number of senior executives at each of those companies, and all very well respected. So that doesn't surprise me. So now I'll continue to sort of put you on the spot. But what I really like to talk about in these series, in this Orchestrating Outcomes series, is case studies. So I'm wondering if you could help walk us through or share some case studies, some examples of activities that you've done with some of your more strategic supply chain partners around the development of new or improved areas around digitalization, maybe some 3/4PL examples, logistics service providers, or other supply chain partners?
Yeah, sure. And I'll have to make sure that I take away all the sensitive information, but
Certainly,
it's a
yeah.
very topical question because, from experience, 90% of logistics data is coming from outside the walls of the company. They're coming from logistics service providers, as you also mentioned at the beginning. And my team and I led a long list of supply chain digitalization use cases. So let me maybe take an example here and there from my experience. So first example, I think when I was a sourcing group manager for warehousing, transportation, and cold chain, I led my team and our stakeholders to drive what we call continuous improvement programs, CIPs, with freight forwarders. And one of the strategic layers of this program focuses on enhancing IT architecture of the freight forwarders so that we can boost performance measurement and control. So that could be, I think, one example. Another one was when I was heading the regional logistics for Asia Pacific. I contractually requested our LSPs, that's in 17 countries at the time, to format their periodic KPI reportings. And we would use that formatted data through collect, transform, load query. And then we would display that in one unified Power BI dashboard. So that was for us a regional pilot, which was expanded globally. And maybe a third example, more recent, when I was heading global logistics transformation, we partnered with Coupa Lamasoft to build that in-house network design capability. So I hired my team to create a digital twin of the end-to-end supply chain. And then from that digital twin, we were running strategic network design studies. The kind of use cases were around merger and acquisition, warehousing and transportation strategies, multi-echelon inventory optimization, even manufacturing strategy. And the program was so successful that it actually earned us a Coupa Supply Chain Spencer Awards in 2024. So a lot of opportunities from a supply chain digitalization that can actually be done.
Thank you for those three examples. Your focus on continuous process improvement. I mean, I think of the pharmaceutical supply chain. That's a sort of a core tenet of the overall industry, right? Focusing on corrective and preventative actions and continuous process improvement. And then your second example around collecting load transform queries. Could you maybe elaborate a little further on that? When you're talking about the KPI reporting, I'm sort of interested in learning a bit more about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So there are softwares available in the market today that are specialized in taking, let's call it unstructured and heterogeneous data, and then to collect it from those different sources, regardless of the format, put it in one platform, and then run queries, usually SQL queries, to transform this information and, let's say, level them on the playing field, and then consolidate them to load them just in one channel into a destination software. In our case, that was Power BI, but it could be done straight to an ERP or a planning tool. It's really the phase where we collect, transform, and load the data prior utilization.
Thank you for elaborating on that. I'm sure our listeners will really appreciate that additional information. Sort of moving forward in the sort of B2B data and thinking about specific business processes, could you take a moment to explain sort of what types of digital transactions you've seen in your experience sort of regularly flow between a drug manufacturer and their supply chain partner? Really interested in that digital connectivity and what type of information flows are helping to drive this process improvement and cost savings and overall supply chain risk management.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. I think the best way to tackle that question is probably to make categories of the type of digital transactions. And let's take a first category, which is operational. By operational, I mean, for example, every timestamp we have at each granular milestone of the supply chain. So like a purchase order is sent, the PO is received, we have the order ready for pickup, order is dispatched, it arrives at customs, it's customs cleared, onboarded on the ship. I mean, you see the whole supply chain and their milestones. Then all the lead times between those milestones, their geolocation, potentially the inventory levels that we have at every nodes or storage location, the transportation modes, the order pattern, etc. So anything that can be translated in time, quantity, or location, I would put it into operation. And it's a very rich, I would say, transaction. It can actually tells a lot of information and be used in a lot of decisions. So it's for me one bucket, the operational. Next to it, I would put the financial transaction. So here we're looking at the costs. I mean, storage cost, transportation cost, packaging costs, working capital, also missed values, losses, right? Anything that a CFO would be interested to hear. Risk, we also discussed that probably the third category of transaction. So internal risks, would it be temperature excursion, quality incidents? You mentioned CAPAs earlier, so that would fall into that bucket. External risks, so weather, we talked about this, natural disaster, social unrest. If someone decides to take a beer on the middle of the Suez Canal and stuck a boat in between, right? So it happened. And then the final one, I would say environmental. I think it's the new addition to the supply chain transactions. So it covers water usage, CO2 equivalent emissions, waste generation, fuel consumption. I think with those four, operational, financial, risk, and environmental, we cover most of the transaction.
I really appreciate you going through that. Yeah, it's you've covered so many elements in a very sort of thoughtful manner, the operational, the financial, risk, and environmental elements. It's interesting to me that the operational elements, of course, you're looking at the POAC, sort of those digital transactions themselves. It's in today's world, it's surprising how often those types of transactions are still handled in a manual process.
Absolutely. And it's where the improvement is, right? Sometimes the pieces of the puzzles don't click the way we want. And I think companies like TraceLink put an effort in making those elements click, right? That's the right direction.
In preparation for today's interview, we've talked about sort of how businesses make decisions and how those decisions sort of flow through an organization. You were kind to share with me sort of your thoughts on, some organizations think about sort of the make or buy process in different ways, and even some organizations have internal cultures around, would they prefer to do this themselves or would they actually look outside? Could you share with us sort of what you've seen in industry and sort of how companies make these types of decisions to make investments in different types of technologies?
Oh, sure, Andre. I'm pleased that this was something you found interesting. So with my background of procurement, I really like that concept of make or buy. So let's take the example of logistics control tower, right? So on one hand of the spectrum, some companies favor, I would say, in-house systems. We would call them the makers. So they acquire, they develop, and they maintain an in-house system with their own internal resources. While they do this, there is a burden of integration. That burden is costly, mostly internal, but in return, they have a higher level of control and customization, right? So for them, I think on that side of the spectrum, technology is an asset. And then if you go on the other side of the spectrum, some companies favor full outsourced systems. And in comparison, we'll call them the buyers. So they buy the output of technology, would it be from a 4PL or a lead logistics provider? And they leave the burden of developing and maintaining the systems to those 4PL or LLPs. Right? And I think for them, technology is a service. And then there is a new, I would say, hybrid model in the middle of the spectrum that I would call a balance between in-house and full outsourcing technologies. Usually, those companies would take platforms, overarching platforms, which are highly adaptable, agnostic to any data format, and then they offer the ability to aggregate and integrate any system. So the technical resources are outsourced, to those companies, but then the business resources are still in-house. So for those companies that favor an hybrid model, I think they see technology more as a collaboration tool and a collaborative tool.
Is there one of those models that you tend to see more regularly than the other, or what sort of any thoughts on sort of the breakdown of percentages of sort of cultures that fall into each of the different categories?
I think here again it's been mostly an evolution. Before, I think we had a lot of makers, and it evolved to a full outsourced system, and I think the industry is coming back to that, right? And instead of going fully to in-house, they're going into hybrid. And I think because it offers more flexibility, and it's agnostic.
Well, and of course, there have been investments in new technologies coming to market. I mean, you talked about the complexity of integration. Of course, here at TraceLink, we focus on helping companies provide that digital connectivity in a very cost-effective manner. So it's interesting to hear you specifically mention challenges associated with that.